Today we're continuing our series, The Journey Begins. Actually, we're concluding our series, The Journey Begins. We'll start a new one next week. And we've been exploring the formative moments of Jesus' life and ministry that have shaped his mission and his calling. And these milestones have been marked by wisdom and affirmation, boldness and obedience. And they serve for us as a map and a compass on our own spiritual journeys. So this morning we're going to focus on trusting Jesus' lead through the story of Simon Peter's encounter with Jesus on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, also called Lake Gennesaret. And as we saw in the movie, the fishermen came ashore. They'd been fishing all night. That was the tradition. That was the best practice of the day, to fish at nighttime. And that was their job. James and John, along with their father Zebedee, who we saw in the video, and Peter and Andrew, his brother, that was their job. They were fishermen. And they were professionals. They knew the best way to do it. And yet they encounter this Jesus who tells them to do it a different way. Now that story, just so you know, it's a great show. That's called The Chosen is the show. And many of you I know are watching it already. But what they do with that is it's not a faithful reusing of only Luke 5. This story appears in many of the Gospels. And what The Chosen is, they kind of mashed up many different versions. So some of what you heard Cody read this morning, some of that wasn't in the clip of the show. But what they've done is put it all together. So we're kind of getting a nuanced version of that. But the meaning is still the same. And really what I wanted you to see was the amazing catch of fish, So we're going to focus on trusting Jesus through Simon Peter's story today. So I want you to picture this in your mind's eye. Picture this season. Simon Peter, he's a hard-working small business owner. He's just finished a long, exhausting night of fishing. And he and his crew have been out on the water. They've been casting their nets. They've been pulling them up repeatedly. And they repeated this process over and over and over all night. And they did not catch a thing. They only came up empty-handed, but no fish. Not a one. And by the time the morning arrives, Simon Peter and his team, they're back on shore. They're cleaning their nets. They're mending their nets. They're packing them up carefully for the next day's work. But they're frustrated, right? Can you imagine? I imagine, I'm not a fisherman. I'm a fisher-eater person. You catch it, I'll cook it up, and we'll eat it, all right? Can you imagine being so frustrated? Not just from a recreational standpoint, you did all this work to get out there, but this is their livelihood. They're paid on how many fish they catch and the types of fish that they catch. And so they're frustrated, they're tired, they're ready to go home. And then that's when this guy, Jesus, shows up. They've heard about Jesus. Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist. And you saw in the clip there's a little thing that Andrew says to Peter, says, I told you so. I told you he was the Messiah. So Jesus shows up, and we kind of pull back a little bit into context. Last week we saw Jesus in the town of Nazareth. He was in the synagogue, and he was boldly declaring his mission to proclaim good news to the poor, release of the captives, freedom for the oppressed. But instead of welcoming him with open arms, his hometown ended up rejecting him and ran him out of town, trying to throw him off a cliff. It was only by the power of God that he was able to weave through the crowd and get away. And from there, Jesus moved on, and he was teaching and healing and performing miracles throughout Galilee. This is that region where we're talking about, where Nazareth and Capernaum, all these places where a lot of the New Testament takes place, is this region of Israel called Galilee. And eventually, much of his ministry centers around the town of Capernaum, and that becomes his home base. And that's where Simon Peter first encounters Jesus. Maybe even in that synagogue in Capernaum where Jesus would have been teaching. And Jesus had healed a demon-possessed man. If you were following along the readings, you would have read that this week. And then shortly after that healing, Jesus went to Simon Peter's house, and his mother-in-law, Simon Peter's mother-in-law, was gravely ill, and Jesus healed her. So there's another moment of Simon seeing Jesus at work. But by the time he reaches this moment on the shore in the Sea of Galilee, Simon Peter knows who Jesus is. He's seen Jesus teach with authority. He's seen him perform miraculous healings, but he hasn't yet experienced what it truly means to trust Jesus. For some reason, he hasn't seen enough to express that trust. So back to the shoreline. The crowds end up pressing in on Jesus, and they're eager to hear about him teaching, because at this point, crowds are following Jesus all over the place. And needing some space, now we didn't see this in the clip, but needing some space, Jesus jumps in Simon's boat and he says, "Take me out a bit. Just row me out a little bit from the shore." And Simon Peter obliges and takes him out a little bit. And from there, Jesus sits down in the boat. It was the typical posture, as we talked about last week, it was the typical posture for teaching, was sitting down. And it was probably a good safety standpoint to sit down in the boat as well. I'm no captain, but sitting is probably good. And he begins to share the word, share stories of God with the people. And Simon Peter is happy to help, right? He knows about this. He's being polite. Hey, you just helped out my mother-in-law. I can row you out a little bit for you to do some teaching. And he's maybe even intrigued to hear a little bit more of what Jesus has to say. But then Jesus, at the end of his teaching, makes a second request. Row out a little bit further into the deep waters and drop your nets for a catch. Let's pause there for a moment and put yourself in Peter's shoes. I don't know about you, but there might be some things that were wandering in Peter's head that he didn't want to say aloud, right? He's just finished this grueling, unsuccessful night of fishing. He's tired and frustrated and probably more than ready to head home for a rest. And now this carpenter turns teacher and rabbi wants to tell him how to do his fishing job? Has anyone ever given you advice for something that you already know how to do? Right? Yeah. Something you've been doing for years. It can be frustrating, right? Somebody who has no idea what you do, like, didn't you love it before you became, or when you became a parent, all the non-parents giving you the advice, right? Yeah. I probably had lots of great advice before I was a parent to parents. And Simon Peter, he answers Jesus just so honestly. He says, "Master, we've been working hard all night and we've caught nothing." But then he says something remarkable. In his frustration, in his tiredness, in his exasperation, he says, "But because you said so, I'll drop the nets." Because of what I've seen so far, I'm not totally sure who you are, but because of what I've seen so far and because you've asked, I'll drop these nets. I'll kind of satisfy you. And what happens next is nothing short of remarkable and miraculous. He casts these nets and suddenly the water begins to erupt with fish. And the nets are so full that they begin to tear apart. And Simon Peter, he shouts for his partners, James and John and Andrew, his brother, and to help him bring the nets into the boat. And together they pull in this enormous catch of a fish that both boats begin to sink. Again, the video is a little different, but both boats are pulled in this large amount of fish, and they begin to sink into the water of Lake Gennesaret, the Sea of Galilee. And it's in that moment right there that Peter realizes he's standing in the presence of someone much more significant than he had imagined. This isn't just a rabbi. This just isn't just a good teacher. There's something more happening here. And overwhelmed, as we saw, he falls to his knees and he says, "Leave me, Lord, for I am a sinner." And I love what the show takes on there. It kind of goes a little further. You don't know all that I've done, right? That's really what Peter is saying is, Lord, I'm a sinner. You don't know all the stuff I've done. You don't know what's going on in my head, in my heart. You don't know what's gone on behind closed doors when I've blurred the ethical lines or when I've just helped myself a little bit more to things that I shouldn't have. You don't know how I've treated my mother-in-law or my wife or my brother or my children or my friends and neighbors. And Jesus responds to all of that, to Peter and to everybody, saying, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of all this you're bringing. I know it all. But he says, don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be not catching fish, but you'll be catching people. And with that, Simon Peter and James and John and Andrew and others leave everything behind, their boats and their nets and their businesses, and they follow Jesus. It's a little bit of extra biblical there of having Zebedee, James and John's father there. That's not in the scriptures, but what a great sentiment from that father. His sons have just left him kind of holding the bag on the business. I'm sure he was grooming them to take over and that he could kind of be taken care of in retirements. And he goes, no. This man, this person we've been praying for, this Messiah we've been praying for and hoping for our entire lives is here. Go. And then he goes, I'll explain to your mom why you're not at dinner. Right? This story is such a powerful example of what it means to trust Jesus' lead. So let's look at this pattern of what we see with Simon Peter's journey. First, we see Jesus takes an action and makes a request. He first steps into Simon Peter's boat and asks him to row out a little bit. And that's a small request, just a tiny little request. And Simon Peter obliges him. Okay, yes, fine, we'll do that. You know. He's probably like, don't mess up the nets, don't touch anything, because we're all packed up and ready to go for tomorrow. And then there's a bigger request. Jesus has finished some of his teaching. He says, row out a little bit deeper, a little bit further out into the deeper water. So, well, that's maybe not even big. And then let's drop these nets. You just finished repairing the nets and packing the nets appropriately so they don't get messed up. And okay. And this goes against everything that Simon Peter knows about fishing. He's like, we don't catch fish during the daytime here on this lake. I know how to catch fish. This is not going to work. It goes against everything he knows. And despite his doubts, Peter responds with a radical trust. And he says, because you say so, I'll drop the nets. And then not long after that, we have Jesus demonstrating his divine power through this miraculous catch of fish that he sends. Teeming with hundreds of fish. I don't even know how many. And then calls Simon Peter to a new purpose. Even after Simon says, look, you don't know who I am, Jesus. even after that, he says, don't be afraid. And I'm going to help you to catch people. Each one of these steps, the step to go out a little bit, the step to go out further and drop the nets, and then this miraculous catch of fish and Peter's response, each one of these steps requires Simon Peter to trust Jesus just a little bit more deeply. And with each step, Jesus also reveals a little bit more of who he is and what he has in store for not only Simon Peter, but for all of us. So speaking of us, what does it mean for us? Like Simon Peter, we're called to trust Jesus' lead. Even when it goes against everything that makes sense, or even when it goes against our natural instincts and our natural experience, even when it goes against our expertise in a particular thing, we're called to trust Jesus. And sometimes Jesus' requests will be small. There'll be little requests. Can you do this little task? Can you pick someone up for church or Bible study? Could you serve on the hospitality team and greet people when they come in? Would you like to join us at community dinner and serve tonight? Whatever it might be. Sometimes they're just little tiny things, right? He might ask us to take a small step of faith. Maybe it's offering a word of encouragement to someone in the church. Maybe it's a place of serving that's needed in the church in a new way or in the community. Just a tiny step. And other times, Jesus asks us to go deeper, right? He asks us to row the boat a little deeper, and the request gets a little bit bigger. He might challenge us to step out of our comfort zones, to trust him with something that feels risky or uncertain. Like, well, I'm okay with giving people rides, but I don't know about doing X, Y, or Z. Something that might put me around people that I am not used to being around, or in a place that I'm not used to being around. And friends, when we radically respond to Jesus' lead by trusting him with such a radical power, Jesus will often reveal his power and purpose to us for our lives. He will provide for us in unexpected ways and invite us to join him in his mission of transforming lives. And he'll do it in ways that we could never have imagined. I mean, when I think about Clearview Church, this is around 4 years now that I've been serving here. Came in January of 2021. And if you would have asked me if where we are today and what we're doing today and the meaning that this church has for the community of Distant Heights and Lellman and Greater St. Petersburg, I probably would have chuckled. Like, okay, yeah. But constantly these last 4 years, you have been so faithful in seeking God's purpose for this church. And God has shown us his purpose and his mission and has invited us to take small steps and large steps and is beginning to reveal the miraculous catch, right? Not that we're bragging like, oh, we've caught this many. No, that's not what we're talking about. That we know the names and we have a relationship with our friends who are unhoused in this neighborhood is meaningful. And that we care for them when we sit around a table and eat good food with them. Those are the measurable milestones of catching people. Not just counting bottoms and seats and dollars in the offering plates. That's not what it's about. Catching people because people are important to us and to Jesus. And these last 4 years, Jesus has shown us his purpose and his mission of transforming lives far beyond what I could have ever imagined. And Simon Peter's journey reminds us that following Jesus doesn't mean that we have to have all the answers. It doesn't mean that we have to be perfect. That's good, because I'm not and we're not, right? It's all about being willing to trust and willing to obey and willing to take that next faithful step even when we're not sure if there's even a staircase there. Even when we're not sure of what the outcome might be, or if we have everything we need, just take the next faithful step. And after that miraculous catch of fish, after they get that thing in the boat, I wonder if they've ever seen that kind of a catch, right? After they get it in the boat, they leave everything behind and follow Jesus. They don't know exactly where they're going on the journey, but they're trusting God's lead. They trusted the one who was leading them. And so, church, I ask you this morning, what is Jesus asking of you today? What is Jesus asking of me, and what is Jesus asking of us? Is he asking us to take a small step of faith? Is he asking you to do that? Is he asking you to go deeper into more unfamiliar waters? Is he asking you to trust him with something that feels just completely impossible? So whatever it is, I just want to encourage you this morning. Whatever that step is that Jesus might be asking you to take, I want you to encourage and to suggest that you respond with Peter's answer. Because you said so, I will. Because you said so, I will. When we trust Jesus' lead in any part of our lives, we open ourselves up to his provision, to his purpose, and to his abundant grace. Amen.